Welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Firstly, a really very big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, did the social media stuff. Just really blown away by all the lovely comments, and according to the YouTube statistics, it was the most watched episode of the show in the first week of being posted on YouTube, which was just so cool and really, you know, lost for words, and really appreciate everybody watching the show and all the comments and all that kind of stuff. And well, how do I top last week's episode of the show? Well, I don't know about topping it, but I'm going to do something completely different. You've probably seen obviously the title page and wondering just what the hell is going on here. Well, the difference with today's episode of the show is, apart from obviously these two samples at the end, I haven't got a clue what I'm tasting. I mean, I honestly do not know. So let me just fill you in on a bit of background. Basically, what happened in sort of end of January, I got an email from Remy Contro, who is the link between the two shows. Lots of love for Remy Contro again. Anyway, no, I got an email from Connie at Remy Contro, basically saying that Westland, as none of you may know, Westland Distillery was bought by Remy Contro in, 2017, I think it was. Anyway, Westland decided, in their infinite wisdom, that they were going to have a big blind judgment of Westland, they called it. So basically, I got sent out all this lovely all this packaging stuff. As you can see, the picture on the bottom I nabbed for the title page. Thought, well, why not? You know, I'm advertising your stuff. So anyway, so basically they sent out 4 samples, and the idea is, including I hasten to add, a branded Glencairn, which is really cool, considering I seem to have problems keeping hold of Glencairns. So anyway, no, so they sent out the 4 samples. The whole point of the exercise was to basically say, we believe Westland is as good as any other single malt on the planet. Now, obviously, they didn't tell you what the other single malts were. The only clues they gave were, one was a Scottish, one was an Indian, one was an American, the Westland, one assumes, otherwise it would be kind of a bit of a pointless exercise if the American entry wasn't Westland, wouldn't it? And one of them was Australian, that was it. So that's all you had to go on. So it was a case of basically, for the judgment, and now the whole point of that was kind of logging into the website and doing it live. Now, unfortunately, my computer at work is out of the arc. It's powered by mice running in a little ball. It's that old and doesn't have a webcam, so I couldn't actually take part in the thing. And while we're talking about sort of old technology, and slight apology for the crap pictures that I took of the sample bottles for the title page, I used my phone, and well, that's pretty much out of the arc as well, and close to death. But anyway, so yeah, basically, so the idea was you logged in, you sort of I don't know, you gave your opinion, gave your scores, and it was all collated and all this sort of stuff. And it looks like from the website, pretty much everyone was about even, really. I think the Indian one was the slightly lower of the 4, and obviously nobody knew which one was which, apart from obviously sort of they knew that sample 1 was this, sample 2 was that, and so on and so forth. You know, country wise. Well, they didn't actually. They just basically said the countries underneath them. They didn't say sample 1 was American and sample 2 was Indian, and so on and so forth. Again, it's completely sort of, and the point is that wasn't really the point of figuring out, although one likes to have a go at figuring out where these things come from. The whole point was how did Westland even though you didn't know it was Westland, how did it compare to other single malts of a sort of one assumes a similar kind of stature, similar kind of age, all that kind of stuff. And you know, according to what it appears, is that it performed really well, which is not a surprise because, you know, I have tasted Westland in the past, and in fact did an episode of the show on them. Episode number, what number was it? Episode number 198 in December of 2016, and I really liked what they're doing, and you know, quite adventurous. As a sort of an American distillery, they decided not to go down the whole bourbon route, and they wanted to do single malt. And subsequently, they've kind of started looking at barley, a bit like sort of Waterford in Ireland. They're also looking into different strains of oak, which we'll get onto with the final two samples when we actually get there. And so they're pushing the boundaries. They're doing some really intriguing stuff. Their whiskey, from what I can remember, was very, very good. My only slight criticism was back then was that it was a little bit too expensive. I forget what it went on the shelf at, but it was certainly pretty expensive, and for a sort of a brand new no age statement American whiskey, it was, I wouldn't say a hard sell, but it wasn't one that was going to sort of fly off the shelves at the price that it was, which I forget what it was. But anyway, so yeah, like I said, today's episode of the show is kind of unique, I suppose, in the fact that, like I said, 4 of the samples I haven't got a clue what they are. So let's have a look at the lineup then, shall we? Right, okay, so as you can probably tell, I have already tasted these. A bit pointless if I hadn't. Like I say, I don't know what distilleries they come from, these 4. I know which countries that they come from because I basically asked the question, and you know, the answer. Well, I asked the question: could I know what they were? And the answer was no, but you got the countries right. When I sort of suggested what I thought they were, so yeah, it's going to be interesting. And I kind of, sometimes when you're kind of trying to sort of blind taste whiskies and try and figure out where they come from, it's more a process of elimination necessarily than a process of deduction. But anyway, we'll get onto that in due course. The last 2 bottlings I definitely do know are obviously from Westland. The first bottling is the first edition in what they call their Outpost range, Colere. It is distilled from a variety of barley called Skagit Valley Malting Alba. Great name, huh? I think they just shortened it to Alba barley. It's apparently sort of a bit of a pig to work with, which is probably why it fell out of favour in the sort of like the whiskey and the brewing industry, one imagines. But like Waterford, they're sort of really keen on bringing back some of these, you know, heritage barley, for want of a better word, and apparently this is a 6-row purple barley, and in actual fact Westland had to go to the extreme lengths of funding a PhD student at Washington State University to do the research into it, and then had to basically sort of cajole farmers into actually growing it, you know, so it's a bit kind of like Waterford. I mean, you know, they obviously had to sort of like say, look, this is a really intriguing project, and you know, they probably met a lot of scepticism from farmers and so on and so forth. But eventually they persevered, and here we have the first bottling of this particular variety. It's been aged for 49 months. In second fill ISC Cooper's Reserve, 62%, and first fill ex-bourbon, 38%. So doing things, you know, what I think is the correct way. You want to basically highlight the barley, which they're doing by basically aging it in American oak and not messing around with sherry or anything else. So should be interesting. We'll see whether it has a completely different character to sort of standard, what's the term, AMBA barley. The second bottling we'll be looking at is called the I can never can't pronounce this, and it is English, it's not a foreign word. Garryana edition. This is edition number 6. It's bottled at 50%, and apparently Garryana is a form of oak, and so not only are they looking into barley, but they're looking into different species of oak and to see whether that has any difference with regards to the maturation. Now this particular bottling has been matured for 41 months, so yet again pretty young stuff. It's been 65% second fill PX butt, 25% virgin Garryana, 5% first fill Calvados, 2% first fill American grape brandy, and 3% first fill ex-Washington apple brandy. Now I'm assuming, although I didn't look it up, and because I didn't really think about it until right at this moment in actual fact, that edition 1 I'm guessing must have wholly been aged in Garryana or Quercus Garryana, otherwise you wouldn't get the influence. I mean, because looking at this 65% sherry, are we going to get a lot of sort of the Quercus Garryana? And certainly when you throw in all the rest, so it does ask the question why. And I assume again it kind of comes back to the whole Waterford argument. It's a case of, yes, all right, you want to look into Twa, you want to look into barley, and yes, we could have aged it all in refill American oak, but we wanted something drinkable. We wanted something, that had some, that wasn't just sort of austere and barley. It had more character than just that, and also, they wanted to sort of showcase their talents with regards to sort of putting a vatting together. And I'm guessing that the guys at Westland have decided to do something very similar. So 65% PX. I don't think you're going to get an awful lot more than PX, but we shall find out when we get there. So I think that's pretty much enough waffling. Let's kick off with the 4 blind samples then, shall we? Right, okay, so sample number 1. Let's see what we get from the nose on this. Oily, rose petal, strawberry mousse, barley, quite sweet. If this isn't Auchentoshan, then I'm a Dutchman. So yes, it's Scottish. This is obviously the Scottish one. I know it's the Scottish one, and it just basically screams Auchentoshan. It is just one of those sort of whiskies that is just so obvious. I'm probably going to find out, and someone's going to sort of say, actually, it's not Auchentoshan, which has happened before when I tasted something and I swore blind it was Auchentoshan, and it turned out to be, well, I don't even know what it was, but anyway, to me it basically says Auchentoshan. Auchentoshan classic American oak. It's pleasant, it's nice, it's not hugely complex, it's a lovely aperitif whiskey, a session whiskey, and to be honest with you, this is how I like my Auchentoshan. I don't want my Auchentoshan blasted in sherry like the 12-year-old. Anyway, let's see the power side. Tastes like it's got a slightly higher ABV than 40%. I think Auchentoshan American oak is 40%. It certainly feels more alcoholic, but again it's classic rose petal barley, quite grippy oak on the mid palate, quite tannic, a little drying on the finish, but I think that's kind of a combination of the oak and the alcohol. Not a little bit of spice, quite pleasant. Again, I think it's Auchentoshan. It certainly feels like Auchentoshan to me, yeah, not a bad one to start with. Right, okay, so let's move on to sample number 2. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Estery, fruity, a little bit of boiled sweet, some potpourri, creamy estery white fruit, apple, pear, pineapple, pear drops. Yeah, definitely pear drops, pineapple, almost a sort of like a slight raspberry note. I think this is the Westland. It certainly reminds me of the unpeated Westland that I tasted, well, I've tasted on a couple of occasions now. I think the last time was 3 or 4 years ago, I think. And it certainly was obviously made in a very estery, fruity style to allow for, you know, maturation, quick maturation and bottling, you know, after about sort of, well, obviously 3 months, 3 years. Nothing's going to be ready after 3 months, is it? So, you know, 40 odd, 50 months, you know, it's basically pretty much drinkable. Whack it in a bottle and get it sold. Yeah, so it's very much in that kind of sort of Macmyra-y sort of new sort of Scottish distilleries like Lindor's, that kind of thing. You know, very much this is the template that a lot of the newer distilleries are going for, and I like it. I love this style. I love my whiskey fruity. I really don't want my whiskey to sort of, well, I don't mind being challenged, but I don't want, you know, I don't want sort of, you know, gobs of industrial barley and all that kind of stuff. I want to enjoy a whiskey rather than kind of, you know, persevere through, you know, a Dufftown or a Deanston or something of that ilk. Anyway, so beautifully fruity, lovely, lovely spirit. Let's see what the pass on. Sweet, estery, creamy. Some people might find it a little too sweet. It's a nice balancing amount of alcohol. There's a bit of bitter oak coming through on the finish, a little bit of citrus as well. I think that's really well balanced. That's a beautiful whiskey. Like I say, lots of fruit, good length, good progression. There is a little rose petally note, so it is kind of saying, well, you know, this is a bit of a young spirit, but it's not fainty, it's not industrial, it's pretty much drinking wonderfully. So like I said, I think this is the Westland unpeated. So yeah, lovely. Right, okay, so let's move on to number 3. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Bit raw, herbal, woody, fragrant, touch of burnt earth. It's quite taut. Bit of vanilla, cinnamon, touch of plum. Could be some sherry there. I think this is the Australian. Now, my knowledge of Australian distilleries isn't very broad. It's not a sherry or a wine monster, so I think we can kind of discount, say, Starward, Overeem, and some of the other distilleries that I've tasted. There's no peat. I don't get the sort of estery fruitiness that I sometimes or have got on, say, Sullivan's Cove, for example. It's got a rawness, a youthfulness. If I was going to stick my neck out and say which distillery, I think it's Nant. It certainly reminds me of a couple of the bottlings that I've tasted of theirs in the past. And it's kind of, it's not quite a monster. I mean, I know that sort of Australians seem to sort of like their whiskies, how should I say, so insulting them, full of personality, or you know, generally speaking, big bloody sherry monsters and wine monsters, lacking subtlety. Oh, I didn't mean to insult anyone, but yeah, I often tend to find that Australian whiskies do kind of lack some nuance, shall we say. But so this has it, but it's a bit raw and it's a bit young and it's a bit. Let's see what the pass like. young, raw, a little bit of sugar water, bitter oak, very bitter on the finish. Slightly drying, slightly tannic, no real sherry character, no wine character. So American oak, I would imagine refill American oak, not a lot of vanilla, quite a lot of spirit, young spirit, raw spirit. It's not unpleasant. It's not my favourite so far of the three. There is a sort of, like I said, there is a kind of an element of this probably should have been left in the cask for a few more years before bottling, in my personal opinion, but you know, not too bad. Right, okay, so let's move on to the final of the 4 blind samples. Let's see what the nose gives us on this one, shall we? Soft, quite oaky, apricot, barley, cinnamon, white fruit again. Quite vanilla, quite heavy on the oak. Touch of spice. I think this is Amber. I think this is obviously unpeated Amber. It's certainly got that sort of nasal profile, should we say? That slightly more heavier oak character that I tend to find with Amber. Again, it's got a lovely fruitiness. It's got a sort of an element of maturity, but there's also that youthfulness there as well. So let's see what that's like. Lots of oak, plenty of oak. Alcohol is balancing it though. There's a little bit of citrus coming through, some lovely spice, some cinnamon. Again, quite fruity. Does bitter a little bit on the finish, but yeah, nothing to get bent out of shape about. And yeah, again, like I said, it certainly sort of says Amrit to me. And yeah, it's a good whiskey. And I think, you know, obviously they've picked 3 other whiskies to sort of like, you know, go up against that are, you know, in a sort of similar-ish kind of vein. I mean, there's no point in picking sort of whiskies that are sort of really divergent, because that's going to sort of like completely mess everybody's head up at the end of the day, really, isn't it? It's going to be a case of, well, you know, I don't like peated whiskies, I don't like this, I don't like that, where, you know, you want to keep the sort of like the playing field relatively level, relatively samey, and just say, look, you know, what do you think of these whiskies, how do you rate them, and sort of, you know, see what everybody says. And I think certainly on this evidence, Westland sort of fits in quite nicely. So yeah, now let's move on and taste a couple of bottlings that I know what they are. Okay, so it's kind of like, you know, a 2-part episode of the show here. Yeah, that's pretty good. You're getting 2 episodes of the show for one. Right, okay, so this is the Colere edition, number 1. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Gristy, young, rose petally, strawberry mousse. It's actually got a very Auchentoshan-y kind of like character. Earthy barley, a little bit of lime, almond, a bit of pepper. I mean, I don't know. I mean, whether I'm really getting... I don't get a vastly different kind of aroma profile to any other form of barley, and I must admit, I suppose the thing is, if I was tasting this against other strains of barley, and this is part of the issue, that, you know, when you buy a bottle of this and you taste it, you know, unless you've got other bottlings that you know that what the barley strain is, you just kind of like have to sort of judge it on its own merits. Now, this is 165 quid, as is the next bottling, the Garryana. And frankly, I wouldn't pay 165 quid for this. It's too young. They've bottled it far too young. Like I said, rose petally, sort of youthful, doesn't have a huge amount of complexity because it hasn't had time to develop it at the end of the day. Let's see what Pat's like. Quite a pleasant spicy finish. Again, youthful, oily, rose petally, Mar-like, spirity. There's a feeling, an essence of fruit, of that slightly estery fruit. It's definitely different to the unpeated Westland, and it's certainly, to be frank, less interest there, to be honest with you. Yes, all right, I applaud the fact that they are using these heritage forms of barley, but just bottle it when it's ready. And this is a classic example that whiskey should be bottled when it's ready, not when you want to bottle it at the end of the day. And really, this should have been left for a little while longer. 40 odd months was just like not long enough. It hadn't matured enough, and maybe they have, you know, casks of this that will mature for a longer period of time, and so maybe future releases of this particular whiskey from this particular barley will be older and maybe showcase a little bit more of whatever intrinsic character the barley has, because at the moment you really can't tell because it's too young. So it's slightly defeating the object of the exercise, and one gets the feeling that they just wanted to get it out there and, you know, say, and I don't mean this in a sort of a disingenuous manner, but they obviously wanted to get something out there to basically say, look guys, this is what we're doing, we're being really you know, looking at all these different things, and they could have said that and just left it alone for a while, you know. But anyway, yeah, I'm being a bit harsh on it, but when you're sticking £165 price tag on a bottle of whiskey, it's really got to come up to scratch, and I don't think this is quite there at this moment in time. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Garryana. So let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Well, I'm obviously getting the sherry. Again, it's young, it's rose petally, it's marry, it's winey, dried plum, raspberry. It's got a lovely chocolatey kind of note, a sort of a sub kind of STR wine cask kind of chocolatiness. Again, I'm not really sure if I'm getting any of the Garryana oak. I mean, I suppose if I'd have been able to, which I haven't, to sort of taste a bottling of this that was wholly aged in virgin Garryana oak, I may well go, oh yeah, that's what it smells like, I can pick that up. But unfortunately I haven't. And yet again, it's kind of, my comments are similar to the Colere. Really, it's a bit too young, it's not mature enough, it's a bit more mature, but then maybe it's not more mature, maybe it's just because there's more sherry. It's balanced, I'll give you that. I mean, I like it. Again, I just question, is this really complex enough for 165 quid? And I'm afraid the answer, as far as I'm concerned, is no. Let's see what Pat's like. Treacly, pruny, winey, dried fruit, loads of PX, potpourri, cinnamon, quite a lot of spice. Not really getting any fruit, not getting any spirit character, no barley notes. It's very oak orientated. Like I said, I wouldn't know if I was getting any Quercus Garryana because I don't know what I'm looking for. But all I seem to be getting is pretty much sherry dried fruit. There's maybe a little bit of dried apple, maybe a little bit of sort of brandyish kind of notes, but that's kind of, I won't say I'm pulling at straws, but I'm really kind of trying to dig deep into this to sort of get this kind of nuance. And frankly, it's a lovely whiskey, it's a lovely drink. If you like sherried monsters, but it's not worth 165 quid. It's not got the complexity, it's not got the maturity, and really, again, I feel it's been a bit rushed out, if you see what I mean. Well, although this is edition number 6, so there's obviously been 5 others before that. And like I said, maybe one of those, maybe the first one was Holy and Quirkless Garryana, and then if you've been following this particular bottling series, then maybe you would go, oh yeah, I can pick that up. But as far as I'm concerned, I can't. And I've been tasting whiskey long enough to sort of know. Well, I think I know what I'm talking about and know what I'm tasting. But so. I'll sum up when I get to the summing up bit, which is next. Right, okay, so let's properly sum this week's episode of the show. Right, firstly, a big thank you to Westland and to Remy Contreau for the samples for today's episode of the show. I maybe don't think I've been overly critical. Thank you for the samples for the Judgment of Westland, and I think it just basically goes to show that sort of, that Westland is producing some lovely whiskey. It's certainly got nothing to be afraid of by doing this kind of competition, this kind of tasting. It's certainly stacked up well against the others. Like I said, Ockentoshan probably certainly came across like that. Number 2 was, I think, the Westland. Number 3, I think, was the Australian. I think Nant. I could be wrong, don't know, like I said. And I think sort of number 4, I think, is Indian. Well, it is Indian, and it's certainly not Port John. It's certainly not Rampur. So it could really only be Amra. And it's kind of, like I said, a lot of the time when you're tasting whiskey blind, a lot of the time it is more a process of elimination than anything else. If you know a few things, you're kind of like going, well, it's not this, it's not that, it's not the other, so therefore it can only be X. And certainly I think there's an element of that then with today's with these kind of samples. There's also gut feeling as well that also comes into it as well. I say to often say to a lot of customers and certainly at the tasting evenings, I say go with your gut feeling. More often than not, your gut feeling is going to be relatively right, because the point is, there is a tendency to overthink these things, to sort of like go, oh, I'm now starting to pick up X, Y, and Z. Is it sort of is it something else? Is it this? Is it that? When sometimes you just stick your nose in the glass and go, what does that say to you? And I would say at least sort of 60 or 70% of the time, generally tend to be right. Anyway, coming on to the Colere. Like I said, I think you've got to sort of take your hat off to the distillery for the obvious geeky element, the fact that they want to sort of look at these heritage barley varietals, and maybe I imagine that they've got more up their sleeve. All I can say is, if you're going to carry on releasing in this range, then just make sure it's a little bit more mature than this, because anyway. And certainly if you're going to ask customers to fork out 160 odd quid, please give us a bit more for our money. And the same I basically for the Garryana as well. Really disappointing with the fact that it's costing an arm and a leg to get to that, and I don't really think it's worth it. At the end of the day, yes, again, it's an interesting concept, and obviously wish them well with that. And like I said, I assume that some of the earlier releases, maybe number 1 or 2 or whatever, was certainly just purely aged in this Quercus Garryana. So at least you kind of got a rough idea, or a kind of a sort of a feeling, or a sort of you knew what the oak was giving to the spirit. because I certainly couldn't tell from that particular bottling. But anyway, so that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. I think it was really intriguing, really different. Like I said, you know, I've got no idea what the hell these 4 samples were. It's all kind of like a bit of detective work, and you know, I'm probably never going to know whether I was right or not. Like I said, I certainly know that I was correct in my countries of origin, but whether I was correct in the distilleries or not, who knows? Anyway, all that's left to say is I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the show, and good afternoon and good ramming.